Hello, welcome to Charter Local Edition Northwest. I'm Dana Cowley, and today my guest is Mary Abrams. She's the director of the Oregon Department of State Lands. Mary, thank you for joining us. We're glad you're here.
Thank you for inviting me. It'll be fun.
For those who don't understand your department, can you explain to us your parameters?
I can. I actually manage a really interesting department. We are the administrative arm of the Oregon State Land Board. Oh. And the State Land Board is made up by the Governor, the Secretary of State, and the State Treasurer. And so we administer their authorities, if you will, plus we have a few other things that have been added on by the legislature. So the State Land Board was developed at statehood by the Constitution and the Admissions Act of for the state of Oregon to manage the lands that were given to the state for schools. So lots of people have heard of the Common School Fund. Our monies, our revenues go to the Common School Fund. And the state received, at that time, they received the 16th and 36th section of every township, and because the federal government didn't have any money then, sort of like now, and they wanted the states to have an education system, and so they gave them land instead, because they had land to give. And so the State Land Board was charged with managing that land and disposing of it if they needed to earn money, and harvesting things from it if they could to earn money. They were also given all of the navigable rivers for the state, so anything that you could float a boat on, literally, as well as the territorial sea, so 3 miles out from high tide. And then the final thing they were given at statehood was the authority to execute the estates of people who died without wills or without known heirs in the state of Oregon.
Oh, so well, that's quite a bit.
It's quite a bit. It's really a broad...
I'm sure that's kind of a bonus that comes
That's right.
an unknown every single year.
That's right. It actually is. Right now it's somewhere around $2 to $5 million a year that we execute in terms of estates. We're always looking for the heirs, and sometimes we find them and we're able to turn those resources over to them. But until we do that, the state has that money.
So from all those varied resources, how does the state make most of its money? Because
okay,
it sounds
so
like you can make money
question.
from a variety of places with all of those options.
Right, so that's a great question, because we actually have, in addition to the 3 things I just mentioned, so we sell authorizations on the land, so for docks or on the water, so docks and leases for crossing it with cables and things like that. So that's our revenue source. We graze on our rangelands, and we issue leases for people to graze cattle on our rangelands, and so we gain money from that. We harvest timber on our timberlands, and that allows us to provide some money to the Common School Fund, and then of course the estates that I just mentioned as well. But what I didn't mention yet was what the legislature has given us in addition to those constitutional obligations and authorities. They've assigned us the role of administering the state's Removal and Fill Act, which governs any removal or filling activities in waters of the state. Oh. Excuse me. And then the South Slough National Estuarine Research Reserve, which is down on the south coast, down by Coos Bay. And it doesn't bring in any money, but it's an education and research facility that we administer for the state. And then they also gave us, which is probably the most important money maker at this point in time, the Unclaimed Property Program.
Oh.
So the Unclaimed Property Program is not gloves that you leave in the bathroom and forget about. The unclaimed property.
The lost and found.
Exactly, the lost and found. It's the lost and found on a very big scale. So the kind of thing that happens, the most common, I think, that most of us can relate to is if you get sick and you get really sick and you have to go to the hospital, and you work through a whole bunch of hospital bills and insurance claims, and at the end of the day you have one last claim check that's maybe $15. And you tuck it away in your desk and you forget about it completely. You just forget about it and it gets thrown out with the recycling or whatever. Normally that money, because it was never cashed, would stay with the hospital, but they don't have the right to keep that money.
Oh.
Because it's your money, right? You were supposed to get that reimbursement. And so the money they're required by law to report that money to us, and they provide the money to us. We hold it and we look for you. Oh. And that's $15 here or there. It doesn't really matter. But in fact, We collect somewhere around $50 million a year
That's
in
interesting.
unclaimed property.
Who knew?
And we try and return as much of it as we can, and we return probably about half to 60% of that
Well, I'm
every
sure
year.
it takes a little administrative cost to
It
try to
does.
find who and where.
It does. We actually are pretty slim and trim, both in that group and in the estates group, and so we do, I think, a pretty good job in terms of not charging the program very much money. But the really great thing is that all of those funds, until we find you with your $15, we get to invest that money just like we do the Common School Fund.
Oh.
And the Common School Fund does quite well. It's like PERS. It has, over the entire history, is at about 7% return on investment. But say in the last 3 years, it's been about 13%. So
Very
the schools
nice.
benefit because we get to keep the investment returns, even if we give you back your $15. If we earned $5 in investment, we get to keep that, and you get your $15 back.
I think that most people don't know about
No,
this. I
that's
find
right.
that very interesting. And since I like my schools, I want my money back less. It's like, oh, you can just keep it.
It's actually a really brilliant. I don't know who came out. The legislature at some point in time in the 50s came up with this and assigned it to us. Different states do it differently. Some states have it just in the treasurer's office, and it's more of a general fund contribution. But for us, it's really great for the state of Oregon because it's now our Common School Fund is at about it's just shy of $1.5 billion, and about $500 million of that is the unclaimed property.
That is interesting.
So yeah, it's
Oh,
a big deal for us now. Yeah.
And you also oversee Elliott State Forest. Can
We
you give us the
do.
status on the forest?
So the Elliott State Forest is a forest down on the south coast, central south coast. It's between Reedsport and Coos Bay. And it's been really our moneymaker from our lands perspectives. It's been our moneymaker since about the 1950s.
Pretty
And
country.
Really beautiful country. Employed a lot of people, got a lot of timber, all sorts of good uses for that forest. Unfortunately, in the 1990s, like many of our forests in the state of Oregon, it was we discovered that we had some species on there that weren't doing so well, and so they were listed under the Endangered Species Act, and that included both the marbled murrelet and the northern spotted owl. Later in the 1990s, the coastal coho were also listed, and we have that on the forest as well. And so here was one of our assets for the Common School Fund. So just like the money, the 1.5 billion that is invested, this is just a real property asset instead of a more liquid asset. And suddenly, with the constraints from the Endangered Species Act, plus a number of lawsuits that really drove management decisions, we are now at a place where we're losing money rather than earning money off of the Elliott. And so the State Land Board just met. They meet every other month, and they just met earlier this month and decided that it was time to really try to divest of that asset, given the status of what it was costing the Common School Fund, and see at the same time if we could protect some of the public benefits that have been associated with the forest over time. The production of some of the species, so habitat for some of those species, as well as the timber jobs, and try and make sure that it maintained its status as a working forest. And provided recreation, lots of hunting and fishing in that part of the state, and people really like to be able to use the land to do that. So, so we're in a process right now of trying to solicit acquisition bids, if you will, from people who are willing to pay the fair market value and at the same time protect some of these public benefits. And that's a process that will go over the course of about till the end of 2017, and we're hoped to be done with that by 2017. And so it's very interesting. We just had a panel discussion on it here at the conference, at the summit, and people I think are very interested to see how well we do in getting it resolved, getting the situation resolved.
Well, that area, which is so diverse and so beautiful and has so many resources, used to be one of your key money makers. And that's dwindling, and you're going to get rid of it, where's the money going to come from for the schools next?
Well, the really nice thing is that if we sell it, we get a big chunk of change and we can invest it. So typically forest lands, I mean really good forest lands maybe make 3 to 4% return every year. Oh. In the case of our invested monies, they're making, depends, but on average since the mid-1990s, 7%. And we distribute about $50 million a year to the schools.
$50 million.
Yeah.
Well, that's a big chunk of the overall budget.
Exactly. It's small for the entire education budget, but it's really important because it goes directly out to the districts. They get it twice a year, and they really count on it. They know it's coming, and they count on having it come into the coffers. So.
Well, thank you so much for teaching us. So many of these things I don't think the average person knows. So this was very informative. Yeah. Appreciate your time and your efforts, and good luck with the transitions with the forest.
I appreciate it, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk. As you can tell, I love my department. So
well, and you know it.
I do.
This is Mary Abrams. She is the director of the Oregon Department of State Lands. I'm Dana Cowley, and you're watching Charter Local Edition Northwest.